Welcome once more, weary listener, to History for the Tired. As the quiet of the evening deepens around you, we invite you to set aside the day's concerns and allow your mind to drift to a time and place far removed from our own. Tonight, our journey takes us to the sun-drenched Arabian Peninsula, to a burgeoning oasis city that would become a cradle of a new civilization, Early Islamic Medina. We will step into a world shaped by profound faith, communal living, and the rugged realities of desert life in the 7th century CE. However, beneath the narratives of spiritual transformation and unity lay a daily existence that might feel surprisingly challenging and utterly alien to our modern sensibilities. We begin by imagining ourselves not as distant observers, but as individuals suddenly thrust into the intricate rhythms and unexpected demands of this nascent Islamic society. So, settle in, find your most comfortable position, and let the gentle whispers of the desert wind carry you back in time. Remember to relax and let history lull you to sleep. If you enjoy this journey, please subscribe to History for the Tired and let us know in the comments where you re-listening from. We love knowing where our stories are reaching across the globe. Imagine, if you will, stirring from a deep sleep, not to the gentle chime of an alarm or the soft glow of a digital display, but to the first faint ethereal strains of the adhan, the call to prayer echoing softly across the palm groves of Medina. The light is not from an artificial bulb, but the deepening pre-dawn glow, a soft, diffuse luminescence that gradually reveals the mud brick walls of your simple dwelling. You would likely be sleeping on a mat spread upon a packed earth floor, perhaps covered with a rough woven blanket or a thin mattress stuffed with palm fibers. The air is cool and dry, carrying the earthy scent of the desert, perhaps mingled with the subtle, sweet fragrance of nearby date palms and the faint, familiar aroma of wood smoke from cooking fires already being kindled. As you awaken, the sounds of the nascent community would begin to emerge. The soft murmurs of neighbors already up for the dawn prayer, the gentle clatter of pottery from nearby courtyards, the low bleating of a goat, or the distant bray of a donkey. Privacy, as we understand it, would be a luxury largely unheard of. Homes were often simple, single or two-room structures, opening onto a communal courtyard shared by extended family or close-knit neighbors. Every sound, every movement would be a subtle part of the shared experience of the community. Your first conscious act would be the ritual of ablution, preparing for prayer. This wouldn't involve turning a tap for hot, running water. Instead, you would likely draw cool water from a communal well, perhaps from a leather bucket, or scoop it from a shared basin. The ritual washing of hands, face, arms, and feet, though simple, would be precise and mindful, a physical cleansing before a spiritual connection. The water itself would be cool, refreshing, and perhaps slightly gritty from the well, a stark contrast to the purified, temperature-controlled water we take for granted. Now, consider the matter of clothing. Your modern garments, jeans, shirts, synthetic fabrics, would be utterly impractical and culturally inappropriate. Instead, you would don simple, flowing attire designed for the desert climate and the social norms of the time. For men, this would typically involve a loose-fitting tunic and a head covering to protect against the sun and dust. For women, layered, modest garments would be essential, covering the body with a loose dress, perhaps a headscarf, and possibly a face veil, reflecting the cultural expectations of modesty and protection from the elements. The fabrics would be predominantly natural, linen or cotton, perhaps some wool, unbleached or dyed with natural, earthy pigments. The feeling of these loose, breathable materials against your skin would be a constant reminder of the intense heat, even in the early morning. Breakfast would be a simple, often communal, affair. There would be no elaborate spreads or sugary cereals. The staple diet revolved around dates, barley bread, and perhaps camel's milk or goat's milk. Imagine breaking off a piece of warm, freshly baked flatbread, dipping it in olive oil, and accompanying it with sweet, sticky dates, a source of vital energy in the harsh environment. Meat, usually goat or camel, would be a rarity, reserved for special occasions or the very wealthy. The flavors would be robust, unadulterated, and deeply connected to the local produce. Sharing food from a communal platter, often eaten with the right hand, would be the norm, emphasizing the strong communal bonds. Once the morning prayers and a simple breakfast were complete, your day's purpose would unfold. Unless you were a merchant, a scholar, or a leader, your life would likely be defined by physical labor or the practical necessities of community survival. If you were a farmer, you would head to the extensive palm groves and agricultural plots that surrounded the oasis of Medina. The sun, even in the relatively cooler mornings, would quickly climb, turning the air hot and dry. Imagine the arduous work of irrigating fields using a qanat system or a simple well and bucket, channeling precious water to thirsty date palms, barley fields, or vegetable patches. The soil would be sandy and demanding, requiring constant attention and knowledge of ancient agricultural techniques. The constant threat of drought, pests, or sandstorms would be a nagging worry, placing a high value on cooperation and shared labor. If you were a craftsman or artisan, your day would begin in a small, open-fronted workshop within the burgeoning marketplace. Imagine the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith hammering metal, the whir of a potter's wheel, or the steady rhythm of a weaver at their loom. The smells would be diverse, the pungent odor of tanned leather, the earthy scent of clay, the metallic temps of bronze. You would work meticulously by hand, without the aid of modern machinery, relying on age-old techniques passed down through generations. Your products, tools, pottery, textiles, leather goods would be essential for the daily life of the community. For many, particularly men, much of the day would be spent in the bustling marketplace. Imagine a vibrant, often chaotic hub of activity. The air would be thick with the mingled scents of spices, dried fruits, animal hides, and the occasional aroma of street food. The sounds would be a constant hum of haggling, the calls of vendors, the murmur of conversations, and the occasional bleating of livestock. You'd navigate narrow, unpaved alleys, jostling past merchants, pilgrims, and townspeople. The sun would beat down relentlessly, creating pockets of intense heat, though some awnings might offer meager shade. Transactions would be based on bartering or the exchange of precious metals, requiring sharp wits and an understanding of fair value. The social interaction in the souk was paramount, a place not just for commerce, but for news, gossip, and community connection. Hygiene and sanitation, while valued, would be rudimentary by modern standards. There would be no sewage systems or municipal waste collection. Human and animal waste would be managed through latrines or simply deposited outside the city walls, creating potential health hazards, especially during outbreaks of disease. Clean drinking water, while available from wells, would require careful management, and the concept of widespread sterilization or germ theory was millennia away. The ubiquitous dust of the desert would cling to everything, requiring constant sweeping and cleaning within homes and public spaces. The social structure of early Medina was deeply intertwined with tribal loyalties, familial bonds, and increasingly the burgeoning concept of the Ummah, the community of believers, transcending traditional tribal lines. You would quickly learn the importance of respect for elders, the value of hospitality, and the severe consequences of dishonoring a family or tribe. Justice would often be administered directly by community leaders or elders, relying on established customs and the emerging principles of Islamic law. Disagreements might be settled through arbitration, but grievances, if left unaddressed, could escalate rapidly within a close-knit community. Communication would be entirely oral or through meticulously handwritten messages. There were no telephones, no internet, no mass media. News would travel by word of mouth, by travelers on camelback, or by official pronouncements read aloud in the mosque. Imagine the importance of storytelling, poetry, and public address in conveying information and shaping opinions. The pace of information flow would be incredibly slow, requiring patience and a reliance on trusted networks. As the day progressed, the heat of the Arabian desert would become truly intense. Even with the shade of date palms or mud brick walls, the dry, oppressive heat would drain your energy, making every physical task a struggle. Dehydration would be a constant threat, necessitating frequent sips of water. The relentless sun would dictate the rhythm of life, with midday often bringing a lull in activity as people sought shade and rest. Evenings would bring some relief from the heat, but life would still be active. After the evening prayer, families would gather for a simple meal, often consisting of more dates, bread, and perhaps lentils or grains. Storytelling, conversation, and quiet reflection would fill the hours before bed. Lamps, fueled by olive oil or animal fat, would cast flickering shadows, illuminating the simple interiors. Sleep would typically come early, driven by the day's physical exertion and the lack of artificial light to extend waking hours. However, even in sleep, true, undisturbed rest might be elusive. The sounds of a community living in close proximity, a crying child, a distant barking dog, the rustle of wind through the palm leaves, or the occasional murmurs from nearby homes would penetrate your dwelling. The constant awareness of the desert environment, the potential for sandstorms, or the simple anxieties of a community building a new way of life might contribute to a restless sleep for someone unaccustomed to such conditions. To last even a single day in early Islamic Medina would require a profound adjustment of mind and body. You would need to shed your modern expectations of privacy, convenience, and instantaneous information. You'd have to quickly adapt to a rigorous physical regimen dictated by the climate, a tightly knit communal social structure, and an entirely new set of cultural and religious norms that permeated every aspect of existence. The pervasive dust, the intense heat, the unfamiliar sensory experiences, and the constant feeling of being an outsider in a world so deeply rooted in its traditions and burgeoning faith would likely leave you feeling utterly exhausted, overwhelmed, and profoundly humbled by the time the final evening prayer call sounded, underscoring just how dramatically different daily life was in this transformative period of history. As the sun sets over the date palms of early Medina and the practical demands of daily life gently fade into the cool evening air, our journey now shifts from the immediate sensory experience of living in this nascent oasis city to the profound communal and spiritual heart that beat at its core. It is impossible to understand early Islamic Medina without recognizing the pivotal role of its most sacred structure and the remarkable transformation of a diverse group of individuals into a unified, enduring community. Our next segment invites us to contemplate the quiet power of shared purpose, the establishment of new traditions, and the challenges faced by those who built a society founded on faith and brotherhood. Imagine, if you will, the early days of Medina, then known as Yathrib, before the arrival of the Prophet Muhammad and his companions from Mecca. It was an oasis town, certainly, but one marked by internal divisions, long-standing tribal feuds between the Aus and Khosraj clans, and a complex social fabric that included various Jewish tribes. Life was often characterized by suspicion and sporadic conflict, a precarious balance maintained by fragile alliances. Into this intricate, often fractious environment stepped a group of weary, yet determined migrants seeking refuge, carrying with them a revolutionary message of monotheism and social justice. This pivotal journey, known as the Hijra, marked not just a physical relocation, but a fundamental reorientation of society, transforming Yathrib into Madinat al-Nabi, the city of the Prophet, or simply Medina. The very first and perhaps most profoundly significant undertaking upon their arrival was not the construction of elaborate palaces or defensive fortifications, but the building of a simple yet utterly transformative structure, the Prophet's Mosque, or Masjid al-Nabawi. Imagine yourself participating in this communal effort. It was not a grand architectural feat of stone and marble at this early stage, but a humble structure, built with the readily available materials of the oasis: mud brick walls, a roof supported by rough palm tree trunks and covered with palm fronds, and a floor of simple, compacted earth. Yet its simplicity belied its immense symbolic and practical importance. This was not merely a place of worship. It was the vibrant, pulsating heart of the nascent Muslim community, the Ummah. Imagine the communal effort involved in its construction. Men, women, and children, including the Prophet himself, labored side by side, carrying mud, shaping bricks, and hoisting palm trunks. The atmosphere would have been one of quiet determination, shared purpose, and burgeoning camaraderie, a stark contrast to the tribal conflicts that had long plagued Medina. The physical act of building the mosque was, in itself, an act of building community, cementing bonds between the Muhajirin and the Ansar. The sounds would have been gentle, the rhythmic squelch of mud being mixed, the soft slap of bricks being laid, the murmur of shared conversations and quiet devotional chanting. Once established, the Prophet's Mosque served as a multifaceted hub for daily life. Imagine its central role. 5 times a day, the gentle yet resonant Adhan would call the faithful to prayer. This was not merely a private spiritual act. It was a powerful public demonstration of unity and devotion. Standing shoulder to shoulder, rich and poor, tribal leader and former slave, facing the same direction, bowing and prostrating in unison. This ritual, repeated daily, meticulously eroded the deep-seated social hierarchies and tribal distinctions that had defined Arabian society for centuries. The feeling of collective submission, of shared purpose, would have been palpable, creating an atmosphere of profound serenity and shared identity that transcended former loyalties. Beyond prayer, the mosque served as an informal courtroom and assembly hall. Imagine community disputes being brought before the Prophet for arbitration. His quiet wisdom guiding decisions based on justice and fairness. You might sit on the packed earth floor, listening intently as new revelations of the Quran were recited, their powerful verses shaping the moral and ethical framework of the emerging society. This was the place where vital community announcements were made, where decisions on matters of war and peace were deliberated, and where foreign delegations were received. The air would often be thick with the weight of important discussions, yet underscored by an overarching sense of communal responsibility. The mosque also functioned as a rudimentary school and a center for learning. Imagine quiet corners where companions would gather, eagerly learning verses of the Quran, memorizing hadith, and discussing the principles of their new faith. There were no formal classrooms, no blackboards, just the quiet dedication of students. And teachers gathered in small circles, illuminated by the natural light filtering through the palm frond roof, or, by night, by flickering oil lamps. Knowledge was disseminated orally through repetition and careful explanation, emphasizing communal learning and the direct transmission of wisdom. Life in this early community was characterized by profound simplicity and a strong emphasis on brotherhood and social responsibility. The concept of Ansar and Muhajirin was a living reality. Imagine the wealthy Ansar sharing their homes, their date palm groves, and their livelihoods with the impoverished Muhajirin who had left everything behind in Mecca. This wasn't merely charity, it was a deeply ingrained principle of mutual support and solidarity, a radical shift from the individualistic, self-preserving ethos of tribal society. Disputes were often settled through mediation rather than violence, and the pursuit of justice for the oppressed was a paramount concern. Despite the spiritual richness, there was often scarcity and hardship. Food, while usually sufficient due to Medina's agricultural productivity, was rarely abundant. Imagine the frugality required to stretch meager resources, the appreciation for every date, every sip of milk. Clothing was simple, often patched and mended, reflecting a society where ostentation was frowned upon and humility was valued. Homes remained unadorned, focused on function rather than luxury. The material comforts we take for granted, abundant, varied food, climate-controlled environments, readily available consumer goods were largely absent, demanding a constant adaptation to a life of material simplicity. The security of the community was also a constant concern. Medina was surrounded by rival tribes, some hostile, others uncertain. Imagine the necessity of vigilance, of maintaining watchmen, of being ready to defend the community at a moment's notice. The very air would carry a subtle tension, the underlying awareness of external threats. This constant pressure forged a strong sense of internal cohesion, as the community understood that their survival depended on their unity and their commitment to shared defense. Even beyond the immediate community, the early diplomatic efforts originating from Medina were remarkable. Imagine envoys being sent to distant tribes, conveying the message of Islam, forging alliances, or resolving conflicts peacefully. The Constitution of Medina, an early document outlining the rights and responsibilities of the various communities within the oasis, Muslims, Jews, and pagans, illustrates a pragmatic and inclusive approach to governance, seeking to establish a framework for peaceful coexistence in a diverse society. This document revolutionary for its time, underscored the emphasis on social harmony and justice within the broader community. The rhythm of life in early Islamic Medina was dictated by the sun, the seasons, and the 5 daily prayers. Days were filled with work, communal gatherings, learning, and the quiet pursuit of spiritual devotion. Evenings would bring a welcome coolness, with families gathering for simple meals, sharing stories, and engaging in quiet conversation. The sounds of children playing, the distant murmurs of neighbors, and the gentle rustle of palm fronds in the evening breeze would create a tranquil, yet deeply communal atmosphere. To last a day, let alone thrive, in early Islamic Medina would require more than just physical endurance. It would demand a profound shift in mindset, a willingness to prioritize communal well-being over individual gain, to embrace simplicity over material abundance, and to live a life deeply integrated with faith and shared responsibility. The subtle yet pervasive emphasis on humility, generosity, and justice would challenge many modern instincts. It was a world where a shared prayer, a simple meal, and a quiet conversation under the vast desert sky could hold more significance than any worldly possession, forging bonds of brotherhood and establishing the enduring foundations of a global faith. As the communal sounds of early Medina gently recede, and the profound sense of unity woven around the Prophet's mosque settles peacefully in our minds, our journey now turns inwards towards the subtle, yet powerful intellectual currents that began to stir within this burgeoning society. While the celebrated Golden Age of Islam might conjure images of grand observatories in Baghdad or vast libraries in Cordoba centuries later, its very seeds were meticulously sown in the humble environs of early Medina. This segment invites us to contemplate the profound emphasis on knowledge, the quiet reverence for learning, and the intellectual discipline that laid the foundational stones for an unprecedented era of scholarship and scientific advancement. Imagine, if you will, the early Islamic community in Medina, not just as a center of religious devotion and social organization, but as a crucible for a radical new approach to knowledge. While the grand academies and libraries of the later Islamic Golden Age were still centuries away, the very essence of intellectual inquiry and scholarly pursuit found its nascent yet powerful beginnings here. At the heart of this was a fundamental and pervasive emphasis on learning and literacy, driven by the revealed texts themselves. Consider the atmosphere within the Prophet's mosque, not only as a place of worship and governance, but as a vibrant, informal school of thought. Imagine sitting on the packed earth floor, listening intently as the verses of the Quran were recited. The act of listening, memorizing, and understanding these verses was the primary intellectual pursuit. This wasn't merely rote memorization. It was an active engagement with language, meaning, and ethical principles. The beautiful, rhythmic cadence of the Arabic would imbue a profound appreciation for linguistic precision and eloquence. Children, from a very young age, would be encouraged to memorize, and for those who could, to learn to read and write. The very act of reading and writing, though not universal, became imbued with a spiritual significance. Imagine the quiet dedication as individuals painstakingly learned to form the Arabic script, perhaps on dried palm leaves, flattened animal bones, or simple pieces of parchment. Beyond the Quran, there was an intense focus on preserving the Sunnah, the practices and sayings of the Prophet Muhammad. Imagine the meticulous effort involved in recalling, verifying and transmitting these traditions. Companions would gather, quietly debating the authenticity of a saying, carefully questioning its chain of narration, eager to capture every nuance of the Prophet's life as a guide for their own. This rigorous process of hadith collection and verification, which would later develop into a sophisticated science of textual criticism, had its humble yet disciplined origins here in Medina. The emphasis was on accuracy, memory, and the integrity of transmission, laying the groundwork for a scholarly tradition built on meticulous documentation. The pursuit of knowledge in early Medina was not confined to religious texts alone. It extended to practical sciences essential for daily life in an oasis environment. Imagine scholars, driven by a spirit of inquiry, carefully observing the patterns of the stars and moon for navigation and determining prayer times. This early engagement with astronomy was not abstract. It was deeply practical. Farmers would consult the phases of the moon for planting cycles, and travelers would rely on celestial bodies to guide their caravans across the vast, featureless desert. There were rudimentary understandings of medicine, often drawing upon traditional remedies and the simple pharmacology available from local plants. Imagine a basic understanding of hygiene being disseminated, linked to ritual purity, though not science in the modern laboratory sense. These were the early sparks of empirical observation and systematic knowledge acquisition. The very landscape of Medina and the challenges of desert life necessitated a practical ingenuity that bordered on early engineering. Consider the sophisticated irrigation systems that brought water from wells and springs to the date palm groves and agricultural fields. These were not mere ditches. They involved an understanding of hydraulics, water flow, and land management. Imagine the quiet problem-solving involved in diverting water, building small dams, or digging shallow canals to maximize the precious resource. This was a form of practical science, born out of necessity, constantly refined through observation and experience. Perhaps one of the most remarkable cultural shifts emerging from Medina was the burgeoning emphasis on equity and social justice. This wasn't a mystery in the traditional sense, but a profound cultural transformation that influenced how knowledge was applied. Imagine the radical notion that knowledge was not the sole preserve of a priestly class or an inherited elite, but was accessible to all, regardless of tribal lineage or social standing. This democratization of knowledge, inherent in the early Islamic ethos, meant that a former slave could become a respected scholar, and a woman could be a narrator of hadith. The emphasis was on piety and learning rather than birthright. This was a quiet revolution that propelled intellectual curiosity throughout the community. The development of early Islamic law, or fiqh, also began its slow, deliberate growth in Medina. Imagine the companions sitting together, discussing new situations that arose in their daily lives and seeking guidance on how to apply the principles of the Quran and Sunnah. This wasn't just about rules. It was about understanding justice, fairness, and the ethical implications of human actions. The early scholars of Medina began the painstaking process of interpretation and legal reasoning, laying the very foundations for what would become one of the most sophisticated legal systems in history. This involved meticulous attention to detail, careful argumentation, and a deep respect for precedent, all conducted through quiet deliberation and consensus building. Even the language itself, Arabic, began its transformation into a vehicle for sophisticated scholarship. As the Quran was revealed and widely disseminated, there was an immense drive to understand its nuances, leading to a deep study of grammar, syntax, and semantics. Imagine the quiet debates over the meaning of a particular word, the subtle shades of its interpretation. This linguistic precision laid the groundwork for future advancements in philosophy, logic, and rhetoric, recognizing language itself as a powerful tool for knowledge, acquisition, and dissemination. The cultural value placed on the quest for knowledge was deeply ingrained. The Prophet's own sayings emphasized seeking knowledge from the cradle to the grave, and even if it meant traveling to China. This created an environment where scholars were revered, where the simple act of learning was seen as a form of worship, and where intellectual pursuits, even seemingly mundane ones like accounting or land measurement, were given dignity. Imagine the quiet satisfaction of mastering a new skill, deciphering a complex concept, or committing a new piece of wisdom to memory. This early period in Medina, though not yet boasting the grand institutions of later centuries, was fertile ground for intellectual growth. It fostered a mindset where inquiry was encouraged, where knowledge was sacred, and where the communal pursuit of understanding was paramount. It was a time when the fundamental principles that would power an entire civilization as intellectual awakening were being quietly, diligently, and profoundly established, a quiet hum of curiosity, building into a powerful intellectual current that would shape the world. As the contemplative whispers of early Islamic scholarship gently recede, and the subtle hum of intellectual pursuit lingers peacefully in our minds, our journey now ascends to the very pinnacle of early Medinan society. Unlike the opulent palaces and the visibly luxurious lives of the Minoan elite we previously contemplated, the nature of leadership in early Islamic Medina presented a profoundly different model. Here, power was not always synonymous with material grandeur, but often with immense responsibility, profound humility, and an unrelenting dedication to the community. This final segment invites us to step into the simple yet weighty world of the early caliphs and leaders, to observe the unique demands of their day, and to understand how their daily lives, far from being lives of indulgence, were a testament to service and justice in a rapidly expanding world. Imagine, if you will, the early morning light filtering into a remarkably simple dwelling in Medina, a home often indistinguishable from many others in the humble oasis city. This is not a grand palace with vast echoing halls, intricate frescoes, and endless storage rooms dedicated to royal treasures. It is perhaps a modest one or two-room mud brick house with a small, unadorned courtyard furnished with little more than straw mats, a few rough cushions, and basic pottery for daily use. Yet, within these unassuming walls resides the leader of the burgeoning Muslim community, the Caliph, the successor to the Prophet Muhammad, entrusted with the spiritual and temporal guidance of an entire people. Unlike the rulers of vast ancient empires, who were often adorned in resplendent silks and gleaming gold, and early Caliph's attire would be remarkably simple, often patched and mended, reflecting a deep-seated commitment to austerity and the humility deeply valued by the community they served. You would not wake to the attendance of numerous personal servants or elaborate courtly rituals, but perhaps to the first clear call to prayer, resonating from the nearby Prophet's Mosque. And the day would swiftly begin with quiet, unassisted personal ablutions, followed by dawn prayers performed shoulder to shoulder alongside the community, reinforcing the principle of spiritual equality. The life of an early caliph was, by all accounts, not one of idle luxury, personal indulgence, or ceremonial pomp, but rather one of relentless duty, profound personal responsibility, and continuous engagement with the needs of the nascent state. Consider their arduous morning routine. After the communal dawn prayer, which was a fundamental pillar of their day, the Caliph would often choose to remain in the mosque, accessible to anyone who wished to approach them. Imagine a surprisingly informal assembly, often held right there on the packed earth floor of the mosque, bathed in the soft, growing light of the morning. There would be no elaborate protocol, no impenetrable layers of palace bureaucracy or official intermediaries shielding the leader. Any citizen, from the humblest laborer to a respected elder of a prominent family, could approach the Caliph directly with a concern, a complaint, a personal request, or a matter requiring judgment. You might observe them listening patiently, their gaze direct and empathetic, offering considered advice, patiently arbitrating small disputes, or simply offering a comforting word and a pledge of support. The sounds within this assembly would be hushed, respectful, yet direct, a quiet, almost continuous hum of communal interaction, focused entirely on addressing the immediate and tangible needs of the people. Following this open and accessible assembly, the Caliph's day would quickly pivot to the demanding and multifaceted administrative tasks of a rapidly expanding and evolving state. Imagine the Caliph not seated behind a grand carved desk in an opulent office, but perhaps cross-legged on a simple cushion, diligently overseeing the collection and distribution of zakat, which funded crucial social welfare programs for the poor, the needy, and the vulnerable. They would meticulously manage the state treasury, the Beit al-Mal, overseeing the incoming revenue derived from agricultural yields, burgeoning trade routes, and eventually the tribute or taxes from newly incorporated regions that were joining the growing Islamic polity. This was a monumental task that, in the absence of modern technology, involved meticulous accounting of every dinar and dirham. Every transaction, every expenditure was painstakingly recorded on simple materials like parchment or papyrus by dedicated scribes working under the Caliph's direct, vigilant supervision. The overarching focus was on unwavering transparency, absolute integrity, and ensuring that resources were distributed justly and efficiently for the manifest benefit of the entire community, prioritizing the most vulnerable members of society. A profoundly significant portion of the Caliph's day would be unreservedly dedicated to the critical function of justice and legal arbitration. Disputes, whether they arose between individuals over property, between families over honor, or between larger groups over resources, were brought directly before the Caliph for resolution. Imagine the quiet, yet intensely focused atmosphere as grievances were formally aired. The Caliph would listen with profound patience and unwavering attention to all involved parties, meticulously weighing the presented evidence, thoughtfully consulting with learned companions or early scholars knowledgeable in emergent Islamic law, and diligently applying the established principles derived from the Quran and the Sunnah. This demanded immense personal wisdom, unwavering impartiality, and a deep, empathetic understanding of human nature and the complexities of human interaction. The paramount emphasis was on resolving conflicts peacefully, fairly, and expeditiously, ensuring that justice was not only served, but was seen to be accessible to all, without any bias towards social rank, tribal affiliation, or personal wealth. The sounds in these sessions would be careful, measured voices, punctuated by long moments of thoughtful, deliberate silence as the Caliph weighed the gravity of the decisions. Beyond Medina's immediate oasis borders, the Caliph's responsibilities extended to the monumental task of managing military campaigns and fostering complex diplomatic relations with surrounding tribes and burgeoning empires. In this era of rapid, often unprecedented, expansion of Islamic influence, strategic decisions about defense, the logistical intricacies of troop movements, and the delicate art of forging alliances with distant, often wary, tribes were of paramount importance. Imagine the Caliph poring over rudimentary maps, perhaps simple sketches drawn on sand or carefully inked onto parchment, discussing intricate strategies with trusted military commanders and seasoned tribal leaders. Messengers mounted on swift camels would constantly arrive from remote outposts and newly established garrisons, bringing vital news from far-flung lands, requiring immediate assessment, swift interpretation, and often decisive action. There was no vast professional standing army in the modern sense. Troops were often drawn from volunteers, tribal levies, or newly converted groups, necessitating careful negotiation, profound motivation through inspirational speeches, and leadership by powerful example. The subtle yet constant tension of these strategic and diplomatic decisions would be ever present, weighing heavily on the shoulders of the leader. Knowing that the security and future of the entire Ummah rested on their foresight and courage, lunch and dinner for the Caliph would, consistent with their overarching lifestyle, be as remarkably simple as breakfast. These meals were often shared unceremoniously with family members, close companions, or even visiting dignitaries, further reinforcing the principles of spiritual equality and humility that permeated their lives. There would be no elaborate banquets with multiple courses or exclusive dining experiences reserved for a select few. The singular focus was on sustenance, genuine fellowship, and fostering bonds, not on ostentatious display. The quiet contemplation of these shared meals would offer a brief, precious respite from the day's demanding and often weighty responsibilities. The Caliph also unequivocally served as the spiritual guide and moral compass for the entire community. Imagine them regularly leading the prayers in the mosque, delivering powerful, guiding sermons, or spending unhurried time with individuals seeking spiritual advice, comfort, or clarification on matters of faith. Their personal conduct, their profound piety, and their unwavering adherence to Islamic principles served as a living, tangible example for every member of the community. This deep, pervasive personal devotion was not a separate, compartmentalized part of their day, but permeated every single action, decision, and interaction, making their leadership profoundly different from purely secular rulers. The quiet strength and inner peace derived from their deep faith would be a palpable, unifying force that inspired and guided the fledgling state. As the day progressed into evening, the Caliph might engage in further administrative tasks, personal study of the Quran and Hadith, or receive private counsel from trusted advisors on matters of governance. Evenings might also be spent in acts of profound compassion, quietly visiting the sick in their homes, offering comfort to the bereaved, or personally checking on the welfare of the poorest and most vulnerable members of the community, often unknown to the wider populace. This hands-on, empathetic, and deeply personal approach to governance was a defining and revolutionary characteristic of early Islamic leadership, starkly contrasting with the aloofness of many other ancient rulers. There were no grand state visits or elaborate public ceremonies designed solely for display. Interactions were direct, unassuming, and deeply personal, fostering genuine trust and loyalty. The life of an early caliph was, in essence, one of profound personal austerity, immense self-discipline, and constant sacrifice. Numerous historical accounts speak of caliphs like Umar ibn al-Khattab, wearing robes that were visibly patched multiple times, choosing to sleep on simple mats on the ground rather than luxurious beds, and actively participating in manual labor alongside common citizens, even while governing a rapidly expanding empire that stretched across vast territories. Imagine the radical and truly revolutionary notion that the leader of a burgeoning state, with immense power and influence, chose to live in a manner often more humble than many of their own subjects, prioritizing justice, equality, and community welfare above all personal comfort, material gain, or self-aggrandizement. This deliberate and conscious choice of simplicity was not merely symbolic. It ensured that they remained intimately connected to the struggles and realities of the common people, fostered profound loyalty, and actively prevented the accumulation of excessive personal wealth or unchecked power, serving as a powerful, enduring moral compass for the entire Ummah, a foundational principle for future generations. The unique and formidable challenges of this period of leadership included managing the unprecedented and incredibly rapid growth of the community, integrating diverse populations with varying customs and beliefs, and constantly navigating the complex landscape of external threats from powerful, established empires like the Byzantine and Sasanian forces. Every single decision made by the caliph carried immense weight, with far-reaching consequences not just for the present moment, but for the fundamental trajectory and future prosperity of a completely new civilization. The constant pressure of maintaining spiritual and political unity amidst burgeoning diversity, ensuring unwavering justice for all, and guiding profound spiritual development in a volatile and uncertain world would demand an unwavering commitment, immense fortitude, and profound personal resilience from these early leaders. In essence, the elite life of an early Islamic caliph in Medina was not defined by material wealth, ostentatious display, or inherited privilege, but by a rigorous, unwavering commitment to selfless service, a profound sense of personal humility, and an unrelenting dedication to upholding justice and ensuring the welfare of the entire community. Their days were a continuous, demanding cycle of direct engagement with their people, arduous administration of a growing state, and deeply personal spiritual leadership, all of which profoundly forged the character and enduring principles of a new, transformative civilization. It was a leadership model rooted in genuine piety, direct accessibility, and a profound sense of responsibility, standing as a stark and inspiring contrast to many other ancient forms of governance. A golden thread, not of material luxury, but of profound moral authority, tireless effort, and selfless devotion that bound the entire community together. As the quiet, resolute footsteps of early Islamic leadership gently recede, and the subtle hum of a principled authority settles peacefully in our minds, we softly bring our long journey tonight to its close. We have wandered through the demanding daily rhythms of early Islamic Medina, felt the deep sense of unity woven around the Prophet's mosque, contemplated the quiet genesis of scholarly pursuit, and finally glimpsed the unique, humble, yet weighty lives of those who led this burgeoning civilization. These immersive explorations, from the practical challenges of desert survival to the profound spiritual and intellectual currents that shaped a new world, serve as powerful reminders of the incredible adaptability, the quiet discipline, and the enduring transformative power of human belief and community. They are stories of profound faith and collective endeavor, of intellectual curiosity and the relentless pursuit of justice. Now, as the calming sounds of this ancient past softly dissipate, allow your mind to drift. Release any lingering thoughts of desert heat, communal duties, ancient texts, or the weighty responsibilities of leadership. Feel the quiet, peaceful, present moment settle gently around you, unhurried and still. Let the gentle currents of these forgotten ages lull your conscious mind into a state of deep, restorative rest. For tonight, the history has been explored, the past has been gently revealed, and your peaceful journey into tranquil slumber can now truly begin.